So hi again, everyone. My name is Tanya Shirazi, and I'm a program assistant for virtual events at the Black Mountain Institute. I am happy to welcome you all to Writing the Personal and the Planetary, a conversation with Meera Subramanian and Neal Thompson. Thank you for joining us for this joint BMI and Orion event. Before I introduce our guests, allow me to express our gratitude to those who made it today possible. Black Mountain Institute would like to thank its supporters, Beverly Rogers, Miriam Shearing, and the Rogers Foundation. Thank you to our partner in this event, Orion Magazine, and a big thank you to Neal and Miro for being with us today. And thank you to everyone in the audience for joining us. After their conversations, they'll take questions from audience, so feel free to put those in the chat. Furthermore, the University of Nevada, Las Vegas wishes to acknowledge and honor the indigenous communities of this region and to recognize that the university is situated on the traditional homelands of the Nuwu and the Southern Paiute people. We offer gratitude for the land itself, for those who have stewarded it for generations, and for the opportunity to study, learn, work, and be in community with this land. We encourage everyone in this space to engage in continued learning about the indigenous people who work and live on this land since time immemorial, including the Las Vegas Paiute tribe and the Moapa Band of Paiutes. So I'm thrilled to introduce our two guests today. Meera Subramanian is an award-winning freelance journalist who writes narrative nonfiction about home in the personal and planetary sense in a time of climate crisis. Her work has appeared in publications such as Nature, The New York Times, The New Yorker, Virginia Quarterly, and Orion, where she is contributing editor. She is author of A Better World is Possible, Global Youth Confront the Climate Crisis, a nonfiction YA graphic novel, forthcoming this 1st, 2026, and The River Runs Again, India's Natural World in Crisis, which was shortlisted for the Orion Book Award. A National Geographic Explorer, Meera is a perpetual wanderer who can't stop digging in the dirt to plant perennials and looking up in search of birds from her home base atop a glacial moraine on the Atlantic western edge. Welcome, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you. We have Neal Thompson is the publisher of Orion Magazine, a former newspaper reporter. He has written for the New York Times, the Washington Post, Outside, Esquire, Men's Health, and others. He's the author of 6 nonfiction books and biographies, most recently, The First Kennedys. His book have been named Best of by NPR, The Wall Street Journal, Amazon, Barnes & Nobles, and Neal has appeared on NPR, PBS, The Daily Show, CNN, The History Channel, Fox, and ESPN. Neal taught creative nonfiction at the University of North Carolina's Great Smokies Writing Program and Hugo House in Seattle. He's a former Seattle and Lectures board member and an avid skier, swimmer, hiker, traveler. It is my absolute pleasure to welcome Meera and Neal.
Thank you, Tanya. Oh my gosh, it's such a pleasure to be here, and it's so much fun seeing all the people popping in where they're coming from. I love that there's so many West Coasters, which I guess makes sense with UNLV and Black Mountain, but it's nice we got the East Coast coming to the West Coast together, which is a little bit of where we're going to start. Is I'm going to read from this summer's issue of Orion. I don't know who subscribes to it, but you absolutely should. It's just such a absolutely beautiful magazine to hold in your hands and read. I mean, I'm biased, of course, but it's amazing.
Beautiful. Thanks to your contributions, Meera.
So we're going to stop. This summer's issue was all about fungi. And so I wrote a piece that actually took me out to Oregon and, oh, I just got blurry. Okay, I won't move too much. So I'm going to read to you from the beginning of Out of the Ashes. We'll just read for about 10 minutes and then Neal and I will go into a conversation and then we'll welcome your questions at the end. On a mid-August Sunday in that bleak pandemic summer of 2020, the air near Central California's Big Basin Redwood State Park felt muggy, almost tropical. Weird, thought naturalist Christian Schwartz, who had spent a good decade venturing among the park's old-growth redwoods in pursuit of mushrooms. He was expanding his mental taxonomy of the fungi he'd become obsessed with when he was 14, following his brother's curiosity, who'd followed Frodo Baggins. Big Basin was a place to walk among giants in the mossy green, footsteps muffled in the duff of the forest floor. A place normally assured to be wet, even in peak summer. All those ancient trees, living and dead, drawing moisture from sky and soil. But that California summer was parched. The waters down in Baja were so warm they spawned a storm massive enough to carry its strength 1,000 miles to the north, where its moist, unstable air collided with the dryness in Big Basin on that Sunday. Hundreds of lightning strikes flashed across the sky in the span of a couple hours. Sparks flew. The storm illuminated a world already off-kilter, social lives ruptured by the pandemic and George Floyd dead, and everyone seeming equal parts angry and frightened. Santa Cruz doesn't get lightning, Christian thought, as the skies strobed and heavens rumbled. The prior year, he'd reluctantly returned to the University of California, Santa Cruz to finish the undergraduate degree he'd abandoned years earlier, when he realized he was much more interested in the mushrooms growing outside of his classroom window than the lecture happening within. A California native, he was 30 years old and knew thousands of species of mushroom by sight and smell and feel. He was ready to apply his self-taught knowledge to a more systematic study of fungi, turning his Big Basin meanders into a set route of study plots. But he still thought of it as visiting old friends that he knew intimately. "I know you and you," he said to the witches' hats and the poor man's licorice. That summer wasn't good for mushrooms. The heat had desiccated even the ancient wet forest, pummeling them to punk. And when lightning reached her fingers from thundercloud to treetop, the fires began. Conflagrations erupted across California. Christian worried about his fungi survey plots in the park. If there were summer fruitings of prince mushrooms, they cooked. The flames of what became the CZU lightning complex fire reached from the forest floor to its 300-foot crown. A quarter of Santa Cruz County burned. So did 97% of Big Basin's forest. A couple months later, officials let Christian return to his study plots long before it was safe for the rest of the public to enter. Alone, he moved through a blackened forest where fires still smoldered, flickering into flame when the wind blew just right. He clambered across the burnt-out bulk of a bridge to cross a creek, thinking, "My place is gone." It felt like a graphic novel, scenes made simple in strokes of black, white, green, blue. The soft duff had been transformed to ash, 2 feet thick in some areas, and he struggled with disorientation. Landmarks had literally been erased, leaving smudges in the map of his mind. He was bereft. And then, his curiosity took over. No one had ever seen an old-growth redwood forest burn so completely. What had started as a baseline mushroom study of Big Basin was now an exploration of what a warming world does to fungi biodiversity. Redwoods were soon sprouting green shoots from completely carbonized trunks, and fungi were fruiting everywhere. What ecological arc, he thought, might I witness? A wash of honey mushrooms along the edge of a creek released so many spores they blanketed the water white. And then he was stopped in his tracks by a multitude of strangers. Tens of thousands of mushrooms he had never seen before, an abundance of the unknown. His heart quickened, and he felt mildly panicked, bewildered, overjoyed. The beloved had done something mysterious and beguiling. "Who are you?" he asked, leaning in to look. He knew it was some sort of hygroscope known as waxy caps, but unique among any he'd seen. He inspected the abundant clusters, which reached up with tall, ghostly white stalks and mocha-colored caps. He held one close to his nose and smelled little, but felt the fragility of the mushroom's body in his hand, like holding water. His love of fungi deepened. The mushrooms were clearly responding to the fire. He gathered a sample, and DNA testing revealed that the closest match was another waxy cap discovered after a wildfire in the Great Smoky Mountains on the other side of the country. He's taken to calling the species exuberant cindercap. Christian told me this story 5 years later in Eugene, Oregon, as the two of us sat before a large plate glass window in Sweet Life Patisserie. His body was compact, bundled up in a fleece-lined denim jacket, and he had a week's worth of stubble on his face. His hands cradled a coffee cup. Now 35 years old, he teaches at UC Santa Cruz, the same school he dropped out of and returned to. If his happy place for fungi is Central California, mine is in Western Oregon, a place I once called home and thought I'd never leave. But I did leave. I went back last fall wanting to understand the same thing Christian did, what a changing climate means for mushrooms. What might we learn from the exuberant cindercap and all of their kin? How does one lie dormant for an eternity and then thrive amid what appears, to some, as disaster? Because it seemed to me that disaster was unfolding all around. Climate catastrophes were increasing exponentially, and American rancor was at an epic level, and an election was right around the bend. How could I use fungi and all that we know and don't know about them as a lens through which I might find greater understanding? What lessons might they offer us about when to hide and when to burst forth, about how to recognize the tethers we have with the world around us and to nurture them so we might all grow stronger? What might fungi have to say about waiting for devastation, transformation to come, and then knowing that the only response is to launch your body skyward, make more of yourselves, gather every friend and family you can find, and rise together. To be exuberant, even as the winds rekindle the fires burning in every direction, sparks flying. So the rest of the story is mushroom festivals and really zeroing in on a couple key characters and going from there. So that's kind of just to set the mood. Neal, are you there?
I am here. Thanks for reading, Meera. I love that piece. I love having it in our summer issue that was all about fungi. That piece was supported in part by a collaboration we did with the Food and Environmental Reporting Network, good partners of ours. One of the things I love about it is that it does so many things at once. And it's something that we try and do at Orion. It's deeply researched. It's focusing on the urgent issue of climate change on the ground. You know, you were there, you saw these things, but it's got this other element of people focused, right? Like people are featured throughout that story, as is hope. I mean, the closing lines of that opening that you just read, rising together and sort of the realities of climate filtered through with hope and working together to figure things out. So I think it's a perfect example of not only that issue, but what we try and do at Orion, and a great example of what you've done throughout your whole career. I want to quickly also say thanks and hello to a lot of the folks who are showing up in the chat. It's great to see the West Coast contingent. I am currently East Coast now in upstate New York, the Hudson Valley, but as Meera and I discovered, we share a background in Seattle, where I spent 17 years. So it was fun to see someone from Orcas and from Western BC, which is one of my favorite places on the planet to visit, particularly Vancouver Island. Meera and I also share a background in New Jersey. So related to New Jersey, I thought, why don't we start with, we're going to talk about a lot of things, and I'm looking forward to everyone's questions. I should also take a break and say thank you so much to BMI for doing this, for hosting
Yes.
this, for putting together a great conversation. I'm so looking forward to it, and you've been great partners. Thanks to Tanya and everyone behind the scenes for pulling this all together. But I wanted to start a little bit at the beginning, table set a little bit, and get a sense of, as a kid growing up, how did you engage with the natural world, if at all, and with books and with writing, and then how has that evolved over time, and then we'll get into your writing career from there.
Yeah, New Jersey. I mean, I kind of couldn't wait to escape New Jersey when I graduated high school, but I was like it was suburban, leafy, close to the ocean, a little town that was surrounded by two rivers, and so I actually spent a lot of time in nature. We had woods right across the street that are almost gone now with development, but they were there, and even as like a second grader, I was walking through the woods and jumping over the creek to get to school because I could like cut through and a shortcut and do that. And so I was very attached to nature. And I think my mom especially helped do that. You know, we had a bird feeder in the backyard and she had a garden that got us going and stuff. So um, even though I was in this place where I got into going to the mall when I was a teenager and doing all of that kind of stuff, concerts at Brendan Byrne Arena and all that, but I still had the roots of being really connected to the rivers and getting on boats and going to the beach and going into the woods that were there. So yeah, so I had those roots, and I was very, very shy as a kid, so I read a lot. We've kept Christmas letters in our families since before I was born, and it's just like when all the entries when I was a kid were like, bookworm, Meera's still a bookworm, like when I was a kid. And I wanted to be a writer when I was a kid, and then I just kind of forgot about it, and I went into nonprofit work and did that for years, and kind of returned to writing as a life, not until I was in my 30s.
Hmm.
Yeah.
One thing I love about telling people that I'm from New Jersey as well is to surprise them with stories of how beautiful and part of the natural world it is. Like,
Yeah.
most people think of Newark, or, they see the crappier parts of the state, of which there are a few. But you growing up near the shore, it's one of the more spectacular stretches of beach that I've ever encountered. The entire state is on the whole right side is beach. I grew
Mhm.
up further north and west on a lake, fishing, swimming, water skiing, hiking.
Yeah.
But what I like about thinking back on that and talking about it to others who do what you do is you find nature where it is. Like, it doesn't have to be
Mhm.
much, right? It can be the
Yeah.
park across the street from you if you live in the city, a city. It can be whatever speaks to you and whatever gets you sort of connected to the natural world. And so I guess another sort of question leading us toward your creative work and your career and mine, and we'll talk more about that. But like, early on, how did you view the natural world and its role in your early creative work? Like, did it have a role from the start, or what was the sort of the evolution of that?
Yeah. I mean, well, I got into um, nonprofit environmental work pretty early on when I was still in college. And so that was my focus for most of my 20s. So I was doing the hands-on work of sustainable forestry and organic gardening and learning about the natural world, learning how you could sustain yourself.
Can you talk about what some of those were, the organizations that you worked with?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I worked with, I mean, way back when with the Georgia Environmental Project, which is long defunct down in when I was going to school in Athens, Georgia, and then moved up to Seattle and ended up in Oregon. And in Oregon, I worked at Perpetual Research Center for about 8 years. And I think Rusty's out there in Orcas Island, another a coworker of mine who's a good friend. And
So,
so that was very much like hands-on. How are you going to learn how to do this? And in some ways, like actually, I never thought about this, but the it's a research center where I went as an intern and lived and worked on the land for 3 months, and it was very hands-on. So you would like have a lecture about soil and pH and what makes soil healthy and fertile. And then you'd spend the rest of the morning out with your hands in the dirt, growing things or trying to grow things or struggling to grow things and trying to put those two things together. And in some way, that is like basically how I approach the writing work that I do. Like I read a lot of papers, I do like these wonky interviews and read a lot of reports and do a lot of stuff that is very like academic. And then I like go out and I talk to people to be like, does this match your experience? Like, what is your lived experience versus, because you can read all the gardening books and then you go out and you try to garden and it's hard. Like, everything's always different. And that's kind of like how humans living on Earth is kind of like that too, where it's always a little bit messier. So like, how do you find the place that brings those two things together? Yeah. So I did that. I did that for years and years, and then I just kind of got burnt out on nonprofit work, and honestly, and wanted to tell
tell me
stories
about
that
it.
reached beyond mission statements. I was doing a zine with my girlfriends, including Rusty, and that was like doing more and more writing. And I was just like, huh, can I write these stories are more complicated than nonprofit mission statements sometimes allow, and that's what led me to grad school.
Hmm. Do you remember the first story that you considered was, the start of what became your career as a nature writer? And did you think of yourself in any terms early on, like I want to be an environmental writer or a science writer or something like that?
Um, I think I just doing more and more writing, and I was just, I mean, I always wrote letters and wrote journals and things like that, but just like the idea of writing and even just that zine, doing a zine with girlfriends, I started writing things and then rewriting. And it's like, I teach at Sewanee School of Letters down in Tennessee in the summer, their MFA program. And like so much of the writing is rewriting. Like when do we ever write something and then it's done? Like never. And so that process of rewriting, I remember starting to do that with the doing the zine articles, and then just experiencing things. I was having all these incredible experiences. The very first piece that I ever published was about I was a very, very strict vegetarian at the time until someone showed up at our research center uh, because they'd hit a deer, and the one of the sustainable skills teacher had gone and slit its back was broken. She'd been called in and she put it out of its misery, slit its throat, threw it in the back of the pickup truck, came back and said like, okay, our afternoon classes, we're learning how to butcher a deer. And here I was a very strict vegetarian at the time, and yet all the reasons that I didn't eat meat just didn't apply to this animal. Like it was not factory farmed, it was not raised in poor conditions, it was not filled with any chemicals or antibiotics, like all these things. And so all these intense experiences, my way to sort them out, to figure out what was going on, was to write them. And that was one of the very first essays that I wrote and actually got published in a little publication called Talking Leaves. I don't know if that's still there or not. Maybe Eugene folks might know out there.
It all starts somewhere. I love sort of the
Yeah,
origin, the first stories and first
yeah,
byline. And I love hearing too about your appreciation for revision because it's something I greatly appreciate about the craft of writing. And I know a lot of what we want to talk about here is craft. My background is newspaper reporting. I was newspaper reporter for 12, 13 years before I pivoted to magazine writing and then book writing. But the newspaper writing was invaluable because every day I had an editor telling me, this sucks, write it again. Like that was just
that
ingrained in
feedback.
me from my early 20s and on. And so I never took it personally. I always,
Yeah,
as a kid, as a young writer, you just do it because you're told to. And then over
yeah.
time, you develop an appreciation for, developing a thick skin. Like it's not personal, just they're trying to make it better.
It can always be better, and you're always just in your head when you're writing. And so like it's so great to get readers. Yeah, editors are fabulous, but then yeah, writing
It's a
communities.
it's a gift, I think, to have someone look at your work and take it
Yeah.
seriously and say, this can be better. I would change that. I don't love this. Um, But I think that relationship, among many, relationship with editors, relationships with friends who are readers, relationships with publications and organizations and nonprofits along the way. I guess I'd love to talk a little bit about the early years of your career, things that sustained you, things that were core and essential to your practice. And then two, if there was anyone along the way who was a mentor or a coach, which I think is invaluable to getting someone
Yeah.
started.
Yeah, I mean, I felt so incredibly fortunate to go to grad school. Like, I mean, I was 33, 34 when I went to grad school, and I studied at NYU, which was just like such incredible professors there. I mean, one of the ones who really did become a mentor and is still a good friend is Jeff Charlotte, who was teaching there. And he had founded the literary magazine Killing the Buddha online, which I ended up, after I finished school, he and Peter Manseau, the other founder of that magazine, had both like moved on to other things. They were getting doing more book projects and families and everything else, and it was about to just get folded. And then me and Ashley McCarr, who were both students of Jeff's, were just like, no, it can't die, and we took it on as editors. And that's another, like what you were just saying about getting the feedback from editors as a writer, becoming an editor, so valuable, both like having to say no to people who send in pitches and realizing what it's like on that other side when you're just dejected when the when the rejections come, but like being on the other side where you're making those choices and why you're making them. And then the process of being an editor just helps you so much with your own writing. Yeah, Jeff Charlotte was incredibly formative. He's just a very powerful writer. He doesn't shy away from um, tough topics, and he just like leans in. I highly recommend The Undertow is his most recent book that really is a tough read because it just leans right into what's going on in America right now on the political front, which he's been so close to for decades now. So yeah, he was a really great mentor. But Rob Boynton was wonderful and really encouraging me to like make a portfolio of. He's like, write of a thing, and I'm like, they tell you to write what you know, but I'm like in New York City and I don't know anything. I might have grown up in New Jersey, but I'd been gone living in the woods in the barn, running around the woods for a long time at that point. And so I felt really like I was out of my element, vastly out of my element when I moved back to New York for grad school. But I went looking for the wild stuff in the city, and that's like it led me to peregrine falcons, which are like some of the most densely populated populations of peregrines in the world might be in Manhattan. And so I like did stories on community gardens and green rooftops. And it's like, what you were asking about, where is nature and like what is nature writing, which I would actually love to hear your response to that. But it's everywhere. It literally is everywhere because we are not separate. This whole idea of the Thoreau disappearing and there's no humans, like we realize that that's just one tiny part of what nature writing can be, and it's a very tiny part of it because we live in the world. But I would love to hear what you think about this. Like, how do you think about nature writing at this point?
Yeah, I think about it more now that I'm part of the Orion community than I probably have in years past, although I consider myself an outdoors person and occasionally an environmental or outdoors writer. But I would say my view of what nature writing means has evolved a lot, especially in the past year since coming aboard at Orion, because I think you cite Thoreau. I mean, he's how many people think of as sort of the forefather of nature writing, and I think that's the limited view. The expansive view is well, it's not write what you know, but write where you are often, and if you care about the the environment, however you define that, it can be environment can be nature, it can be the building you're in, it can be Orion did a themed issue a few years ago about hospitals. Places are environments. And so one of the things Orion is doing, and I'm proud to be part of it, is really pushing the definition of environmental writing and pushing to the scope of what those stories look like and who gets to tell them.
Yeah.
The issue that you read from was our summer issue. It was about mushrooms. A little bit more traditional, but the way we came at it was from many different perspectives. Maria Popova wrote a wonderful piece for us. Erica Berry wrote for us. But some of our other issues really push at the boundaries of nature writing and what it means to write about environment. This spring, we had an issue focused entirely on queerness and ecology. Sort of queer planet was the theme of that issue, looking at how all ecology is queer ecology and how that sustains the natural world. We have an issue coming up this fall looking at what we call like the natural rhythms of hip hop. Not traditional nature writing at all, but
Mhm.
this really broad view of, an environment is where you come from, and it's how that environment shapes you, and that's how you look at the world. In this case, we had a bunch of writers. Hanif Abdurraqib was our guest editor, solicited a bunch of writers to explore their experiences in their own environments, and then exploring the music and the sounds and the rhythms that come out of that. It's a really fascinating exploration of different types of environments and what emerges from those. So
Mhm.
that's what I view these days as nature or environmental writing. It's what you make it. It's where you
Yeah.
are.
Yeah.
And I'll use that to transition to a question back to you. because I've heard you and seen in your bio and elsewhere you describe where you live as a glacial moraine near the edge of the Atlantic. And I love that because it describes not a town or a building or a place, but sort of your person, your relationship to um, someplace geological, someplace ancient, right? And so I don't know. That's not a question, but maybe
Yeah.
talk a little bit about that and how you view your place in the world, and then how that informs your writing and the topics that you care about.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't really know anything about geology. I wish I knew more, but I find that I often go looking for it when I'm writing about the places where I am. I mean, I'm on Cape Cod. This isn't not an ancient place. This place is like so young, and it's like a reminder that, you know, 12,000 years ago, this was under ice. And then none of this existed. And so, you hear, oh, it's like old Cape Cod. It's like, what does that mean? Ice? Like, how far back are we going? And that question of time, I feel like deep time gives us a perspective that is really fundamental. There was this story that I did about Georgia peach farms, and I was in total middle Georgia, and the peaches had failed because it was not cold enough for to make the fruit set, and so I'm talking about changing climate and everything. And one of the farmers told me that they find shark's teeth in the peach orchards in middle Georgia. And so I spent a good, half a day just researching Georgia's geology. And, once, we talk about sea level rise, and we're talking about it in inches and feet, maybe at this point. But there has been tremendous variation on this planet. And one time, the middle of Georgia was the coast, and there were sharks there, and there are teeth that still remain in that. And so, like, the land has this memory of things. And so, like, finding ways to use geology as a way into, I don't even know I'm just rambling now. I don't remember what your question was. But like bringing all these things together is like what makes the writing interesting for me, because we get like this privileged time to just go explore and be curious about things and connect dots. I mean, the end of that story was about the shark teeth of like, the earth is changing, sea level rise is happening. We have no idea, like the pace of those things, we have no idea what we're in for. But like recognize that things have changed before and they will change again. We have this like, I think, ability as humans to get really stuck in like our lifetime, the frame of our lifetime, and think that that's like the way it is or always was. And I mean, the pace of things is really changing
Yeah, yeah,
now, but generally, it just gives a deeper perspective to think of it in that geological time frame.
yeah, yeah. Historic time frame too.
Yeah.
So a couple questions about, I guess, the stories you choose, how you approach them, uh, and I'll just set it up with a when when I started writing stories and books, I thought a lot about what kind of writer do I want to be, and I
Mm.
think we clearly have a lot of writers joining us today, and I think it's a big question, and it's not there aren't easy answers. In my case, I just wanted to write long form stories mostly about people, often about people overcoming setbacks and challenges, people to admire. There was an Americana historical aspect to some of my books and stories, but it wasn't more specific than that, much to my agent's frustration. He wanted me early on, like my first book was a biography of Alan Shepard, first American in space. So my agent thought, cool, you're going to be that writer. You're going to write about, space or science or the military or whatever. And I ended up next writing about Southern moonshiners and the early days of NASCAR. I just went where
Yeah. Yeah.
the stories took me and where I wanted to follow. In
Right.
your case, you have intentionally stayed close to this, broad and broadly defined area of nature writing and environmental writing and climate writing. But when you go into your specific stories, like I want to get a sense of how you choose what needs to be there,
Yeah.
There's definitely an urgency to what you write about, and but what else? What do you need?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I follow my curiosities and my interests, which are slightly weird and eclectic, but but like the I mean, I've been very, I know in the poll, people were also talking about just like the livelihood part of writing. And so for me, I've always just written what I want to write. And then I also try to like piece together other jobs that make sure that I can pay my rent. So like, it's just one way to do it. There are other people who tell me that they become great writers by being like just working at a paper or whatever and being tasked with writing whatever needs to be written and doing it. So there's totally different ways to do it. What I have chosen to do is that I just can't get excited to write about something that I don't care about. So I've mostly just followed my own obsessions. And so um thinking about how we live on this earth, how we do it sustainably have been like those have been like the preoccupying questions. But then they lead to things like I said, I moved to New York City and then I became obsessed with peregrine falcons. And then that led me to being in like circles of people who are talking about birds of prey. And then I find out that something's going on with vultures in India. And so that like led to my first book was a story that I wrote about the cataclysmic vulture decline that's happening in South Asia. And so like one thing leads to the next, kind of like you're saying, you've had that same experience, but um, I feel like each thing builds on the prior experience. And so even when I ended up like writing the book about India, I focused on the five elements and told five different stories. And so like with the fire story ended up being about clean cook stoves, which is the work that I was doing back in Oregon at that Aprovecho Research Center. They built and developed and tested clean, efficient wood cook stoves. So when I became a journalist, I was still interested in cook stoves. And I'm like, okay, let's go see these things in the wild. And then it turned into a very complicated, different story. But that is, all of those experiences just feel like they build one upon the other. And I'm sure even when you focused on different topics for your books, that you still had there was, I imagine, resonance between, the experiences of reporting and researching and writing those, even if they're totally different topics. But was that your sense?
It is, and some of that is is clearer in hindsight.
Hmm.
But I think that's okay too.
Yeah.
Like you said, one thing leads to another, one story leads to the next. You might not be sure why you're going down this path, and then you
Yeah.
realize, oh, because I was writing about this in my previous book or magazine story, and it led to this, and they tie together in these ways.
Hmm.
So now I see a through line. At times it was felt a little more erratic, just pursuing what drew my curiosity, really. But I want to get a little bit closer to this idea that I think you touched on of sustaining it, right? Like how
Yeah.
it's not an easy thing.
No,
Being
it's
a
not.
writer is not a no-brainer. The assignments, the books, they're all sort of hard won and sometimes sporadic. And I'd say that for me, one thing that I'd share with the group, if anyone is in this similar place, community for me has been such a key
Hmm.
component of everything I've done and staying close to various communities, but the overall sort of writing community. I didn't do an MFA, because I was in journalism for so long, but every place I've lived, I've gotten to know the local booksellers. I've gotten to know, a nonprofit. In Seattle, it was Seattle Arts and Lectures or Hugo House, where I taught. I think it's so, especially these days, especially with a lot of what we do as writers, particularly environmental writing, under threat and at risk, to be honest, those communities are more crucial than ever.
Yeah.
Nonprofits are among them. Like get close to those places where you're
Hmm.
part of a group and you're helping each other move each other's work forward. So maybe you could talk a little bit about that too.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I mean, I did have some community that emerged out of grad school, but then Killing the Buddha, working on that with people who were, one I knew from grad school, but not others, and that's a whole community of people that we were helping each other along, and that was completely unpaid, completely like that was just like that was like the volunteer thing that we did, and we organized events and we did all this stuff, and it was like there was no compensation, but the compensation was like the community that forms around that. I had a writing group in Brooklyn that I was part of when I was there, which was great. I'm still close friends with many of those people. Um, uh, I do fellowships. I'm a huge fan of fellowships. They're incredible opportunities out there to learn, as well as like residencies to give you space and support to actually write. But Metcalf down at URI, Marine Biological Lab here on the Cape. But I've done fellowships with both those places, which deepen my own reporting and scientific skills, because I'm not a trained scientist. I feel comfortable reading academic papers and talking to scientists, but that's not my training. And so those fellowships, those places have communities and build with each other. I just, I mean, just like a fun story, Liz Rush, who's a wonderful Orion writer, she and I both did a Metcalf climate fellowship in St. Louis, and we were just put in the same room. We never met each other, didn't know each other, put in the same room, and we were just like talking, and we find out she was working on Rising at that point, which is this amazing book. And I had done a story actually for Orion about post New York City post Hurricane Sandy and what they were trying to do, and we'd interviewed the same people in Staten Island. So we'd had all these connections, and those connections remain. I literally just met her this afternoon and went for a walk. Like, so and we, you find those people that are trying to do the same thing you're trying to do in the time frame, like a lot of times you're finding people who are working at the same level for you and also higher, and you're all teaching each other different things. And if you can't find those groups, like, make them. I'm in another climate reading group right now that's actually a lot of Orion writers as well, that we realized there was like a missing thing of authors who are working together to try to figure out how to tell this climate story, because it can be so difficult. And we just formed a group, and Zoom lets us do that regardless of geography. So you can find the people who are interested in what you're interested in, and make the group. If you can't find the one that's out there, like, make one.
Yeah, I think that's a great point and brilliant. It's for me, I think it's vital to being a writer, to be
Yeah.
connected to other writers in different ways, support each other. And I find it's just such an incredibly generous space too. Like, people want to help
Yeah.
each other, thrive and succeed with their work. Happy to
Mm-hmm.
be writers for each other, happy to offer a blurb quote of support or connect you to an agent or editor, and or to a magazine. It's nurturing and it's supportive, and it's sustained me for decades. And like you said, some of
Yeah.
the relationships I have to this day go back many, many years, because we were at some residency together or taught together at some place.
Right.
It's vital, especially these days.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so speaking of these days, and we got a few minutes before we're going to turn it over to some questions, but I
Oh,
did
wow.
want to
Yeah.
get I know I could probably keep going for another hour, but I want to hear other questions. But I did want to get your take on the moment we find ourselves in, and your work focuses on bringing scientific issues and climate issues to life, making them accessible. I think you're so good at bringing people into the stories and bringing them to life. Um, that's sort of the topic we're talking about here, both the personal and the planetary, and that's what you do best. But maybe talk a little bit about your strategies and how you interview people or bring people into the stories, but also these days, what are the risks given the crazy ass political climate we're in? What are you seeing and hearing, and
Yeah.
how's that added to the challenge of the work that you do?
Yeah, it is. It is definitely it's challenging on multiple levels. Like I was saying, that, I do the research and the interviewing, and it feels like, I mean, it's just been heartbreaking to like go back to like we just were checking this amazing resource list that's at the end of the graphic novel. And we were checking it right before it was going to print just to make sure everything looked okay. And some of those like .gov sites that used to be stalwart, dependable places where you could always feel like you would go there and get accurate information, were literally just dark. And it was just heartbreaking. So uh, people are resourceful, a lot of resources that have gone dark. There are universities and nonprofits that are trying to keep that information alive. The political climate is really hard. I mean, I luckily do not interview politicians very much. I've had to do that more in India because a lot of times just access, they insist that you um, talk to the higher ups. It's very hierarchical structure. And so I try to just weave that into the story. And like I wrote about this is the world's second largest solar farm in India, and I had to spend an inordinate amount of time interviewing this head guy who just was I wish I could go into the whole story of the process of interviewing him, which was kind of like chasing a toddler to try to just get him to sit down. And then once he sat down, he said exactly what you would guess that he would say. And so weave it into the story. That is part of the story when you are having trouble finding people to talk, or if there is hesitancy. That Georgia Peach story, like I was feeling uncomfortable because I was writing for Inside Climate News, and here I'm going to the reddest of Trump country to ask people about climate change. And I can't even like dance around it because I have to say, I'm here with Inside Climate News. And so, this old timer that I met, he was kind of dancing around the word climate too. And I found we were both like, he's seeing changes. He's seeing what's happening. He's not blind. He's done this all his life. He knows what's happening, but he doesn't want to use the word climate. And I didn't want to use the word climate either. So like, make it part of the story. Like, don't pretend that those awkward, difficult challenges aren't there. I think it makes it more real for readers to have that curtain pulled back a little bit and recognize that we're all just humans trying to connect with each other. And in terms of the actual on the ground reporting, even though everything is so volatile, I think we all know that there are so many examples that we have on our everyday lives where we are sitting and having like good conversations, if they're not political, with people who might have really, really different views. And then the challenge there is to just, I would say in those moments, to really just shut up and listen and be the interviewer who helps you, open a door for that person to talk to you, because that's what you're there for. You're not there to try to change a mind. If you're, being there as a journalist, you're not trying to change their mind. You're trying to understand why they think what they think, because that's the worldview that might help be illuminating in some way. But it's super challenging. It's challenging financially. It's challenging because our news has become so bifurcated that nobody's even reading the same sources politically. And so like that, I will not say that it's not challenging and getting more challenging in so many ways.
I think that's a good place to maybe transition to other people's questions, but I wanted to call out that I think that what you just talked through highlights the hard work that you do and other writers who work alongside you and for Orion do is putting yourself in that place to ask those questions and try and understand what other people are thinking and feeling and not
Yeah.
assume anything. Like it's easy to turn your back on the other side and say, I mean, I do it all the time. You see these people and think, how can you possibly believe what you believe? But for you to put yourself face to face with those folks and try and understand, then the story that emerges from that is all the stronger because it gets us closer to, um, the truth.
Yeah, yeah. And that whole Inside Climate News series that's on my website. That was like 9 stories from all over America, from the Trump areas that had won the 2016 election really solidly, but also were dealing with like climate catastrophes, a failed peach harvest and no snow for dog sledding, and fly fishing rivers that were closing down, and droughts and floods and all the good stuff. But it was really trying to like be compassionate about trying to understand why people believe the stories that they believe.
Yeah. Well, like you said, they see it, they live it.
Hmm.
They're not blind to it. They might have a different language to describe what's
Yeah,
happening and different explanations for it,
yeah,
but it's doesn't make it any less real to them.
right.
Um, Tanya, do we want to start chipping away at some questions? You want to help us
Yes,
out?
yes, of course. Thank you so much for that lovely conversation. We have a question from Amy. The journalism climate is hard too. For instance, the publication I used to write for collapsed during COVID when ad revenue dried up. What to do about the problem that more people want to be writers than there are places to publish or readers to read what they write?
Yup.
Yeah, I don't know if you want to take that as the publisher on the.
I'll start and then we can go back and forth. It's super challenging, no question, and it makes me sad to see places that I used to write for either gone or down to a couple of pages. I used to write for the Baltimore Sun, which is now owned by some asshole hedge fund guy who's just tearing it apart. It's a shadow of its former self. Another of my former papers, Seattle Times, which merged with the Tampa Tribune, publishes twice a week. You know, they're online, but a daily newspaper now publishing twice a week. It's you're seeing it all over the place, and it's heartbreaking to me having come up through that world. But there are definitely places where you can get published or publish your own work. I'm a big fan of Substack. I did a COVID project of my own on Substack called Blood and Whiskey, crime fiction and cocktails. Just because everyone was locked down, it was my little project. Speaking of communities, I found a great community of writers there, and I still read many of those publications. It's a place to try out your stuff and find readers and connect with other writers and readers. Um, Orion does open up for pitches once per issue. So you can keep an eye on our website and see when we're open for pitches. So we do publish folks who are new to us. I just subscribe to Poets and Writers. See what they're promoting for literary magazines and opportunities for writing contests and writing programs. Like just get yourself out there. It's a lot of hard work, and it's easy to get discouraged. But I think doing the work is a way to get through the discouragement.
Yeah, I would agree, and just keep going. Like I tried so hard to get into Orion. It took me years. It took me literal years. I got so many rejections, and then I bumped into some other writer in New York one time, and she said, "Oh yeah, they're looking for stuff." I don't even remember. I think it's a section that's not there anymore. That was in the back. Like look for the little like even if you've got this big idea, if you're trying to break in, look for the lay of the land, look for the small pieces that will get your foot in the door and have you like make a connection with an editor, and don't feel like, oh well, that's not my big story. Like no, just get your foot in the door, and it just takes time and perseverance and a thick skin, like a thick skin about your own work, so that you're always open to editing and feedback, and also a thick skin so that when the rejection letters come in, which they will, I give my students at Sewanee like a card that if they get like 10 rejections, they get to buy an ice cream cone, so like take those rejections, and then just immediately you go to the next place. It's just like back on the horse and back on the horse. Um, and I think those communities are really are huge. They really, really are important because you can, I mean, I'm also a member of Society of Environmental Journalists. I've been since I was started in grad school, and that has been a huge community, freelance listserv. Who has an editor here? Does anybody have a name there? I got this story idea, but I don't know where it fits. All of those things were instrumental in like getting published and working your way up. Yeah, it's not easy, but it is possible.
Thank you. Sarah asks, any advice to writers who want to write fiction about environmental issues in a way that is responsible, relevant, and emotive? For example, I'm working on a speculative piece on Lake Michigan. How do you approach scientists to better understand the real issues when you are using fiction as the writing vehicle?
Hmm.
Mm,
I think climate fiction, if you want to call it that, it's again, that's kind of shoehorning it or narrow folk, but I love climate fiction. There's so many good books out there. Wild Dark Shore, Charlotte McConaughey, I want to say is her name. Seed Bank on the coast of a island near Antarctica came out a year ago. Another book by Amity Gage about a lost hiker on the Appalachian Trail. Sorry, I think there's so many good books out there that come at climate environmental issues from the perspective of fiction are wonderful, and I love the whole genre. And I think you can still work in some of what Meera was talking about, learning the research, talking to experts, keeping that information off to the side, not leaning on it too heavily if you want to tell a compelling fictional story, but having that as kind of the base that gives your story credibility and accuracy. So I know we're running out of time, so I'll punt that over to Meera if you have more thoughts.
Just Kim Stanley Robinson, Ministry for the Future, was drawing on all sorts of real life characters and just bringing them together. And Richard Powers, the Overstory, same thing. So like, yeah, do your homework. Don't just sit at your desk and ruminate. Like, do research, and it will give you a chance to feed that fiction with some good stuff, and then run.
One last question. How do you write to this moment when the political climate is changing so fast? Chris asks.
Yeah, I mean, it is challenging, but I saw somebody mention about please talk about hope too in there, and I would just put these two things together. One is to find your community, find your writing community, but also your your people to be with, because I think that is how we survive. I mean, it is hard. I have been, if you see my inbox every morning in terms of being on climate listservs and news alerts and stuff, it can be really a tough way to start the day. But I think the reality is that the people that I've connected with through the work on climate and environment and writing are all the people who sustain me. And that is those two things go together. We are in challenging times, and there's not really an end in sight. Like, things are going to change. I think we need to really be thinking about being adaptable and looking forward. I mean, we talked about how we shifted telling nature stories, to what it is now from what it used to be. We need to just keep thinking about like what comes next. We need to be looking down the road and telling stories. Like Ministry for the Future is incredible, where it is there are some very bleak parts, but other parts are very, very hopeful about how we get through this and what happens on the other side.
Thank you so much for that response. I love that we close with talking about hope. It was a great wrap up to the conversation. Is there any last comments that you want to say, Meera or Neal?
Can I add one thing? Just it's continuing on what Meera was just exploring. It's something that stuck with me. A few weeks ago, I was at the Brooklyn Book Festival. Orion hosted a panel in conversation with a couple of our writers, Leslie Jameson, who's a columnist for us, Eric Dean Wilson, a writer in Brooklyn, and then Emily Rabateau. Emily talked about one of her stories that she was working on and visiting an Inuit community on the coast of Alaska and looking at the ocean encroaching on their ancient community and then asking one of the elders, how do you sustain hope? Exactly this question that was just asked. And he looked at her and said, as if it was obvious, like we just help each other. That's all we can do. And I think that's this community that we're in tonight, thanks to BMI for it, thanks to Meera, that's all we can do together is help each other.
That's amazing. Thank you so much, Neal and Meera. We're so grateful to have you here. So thank you everyone for attending Writing the Person on the Planetary, and we hope to see you at our next virtual event, which will be our sandbox reading series. It will take place next Tuesday, October 28th from 5 p.m. to 6:30. So this is a reading exchange between 4 creative writing programs in the Southwest. So it's the Institute of American Indian Arts, New Mexico State, UC Riverside, and UNLV. So come hear poems, stories, essays crafted from our Southwest landscapes today. I will drop the link in the chat to register, and you can also register on blackmountaininstitute.org. We hope you all have a great rest of your week. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for coming. Thanks,
Thanks,
Neal.
everyone. Thanks so much. Bye, Meera. Bye, Tanya.
Bye. Thank you.